talk about. So as always, I will be recording this session. So if you're not comfortable with that, please just turn off your cameras. And if you're a member, today counts as a passport for your passport stamp. So make sure you get your parents to sign this afterwards. And then when your passport's complete, you can send it in for great prizes. And if you're not a member, welcome. So glad that you're able to join us today. And we hope that you'll have a good time with us and maybe consider becoming a part of our community. The chat is always open, so feel free to say hi in the chat and let us know where you're calling in from. And you can put questions in there and we'll take breaks throughout the presentation and answer questions. And also we'll take breaks between the different speakers and maybe we can unmute and have a little bit of a chat then too. So lots of opportunities if you have things that we don't cover directly. So I think that's it for me. Yeah, so excited. I'm going to turn everything over to Allison.
Okay, thank you, Christina. And hello and welcome everyone to this really exciting joint program that is based on wild salmon, which is one of BC's critical foundation species. Just to give you a little bit of a background on our organization, Take a Stand Youth for Conservation, it's actually a school program open to elementary and secondary students. And really our major goal or aim is to get youth inspired. So you guys inspired to take action to help conserve our spectacular province, including its nature, its wildlife, and its wild places. And so this organization started with a unique partnership between myself at Simon Fraser University and the creators of a beautiful film called Stand. So Norm Hann and filmmakers Nick Tycrob and Anthony Bonello. And most recently, we have a fifth team member, that's Fernando Lessa. He is our outdoor educator. And Fernando comes from South America. And through his photography and science, he showcased some amazing places in the world, like the Amazon. But his favorite place, of course, is British Columbia. And he's going to talk all about wild salmon right in our city. So essentially right in our backyards and how important it is to understand what we have locally in order to preserve these iconic species and their habitats. Our other presenter is Norm Hann, so he lives in Squamish. And he is a stand-up paddleboarder and expedition leader in the Great Bear Rainforest. So he's going to talk about the Great Bear Rainforest and some of the ecosystems there supported by wild salmon. And really through his passion, his sport, and his community mindedness, Norm's brought a lot of awareness to that area of central northern British Columbia, and he's also fought for the protection of the First Nations food harvesting areas up on the coastline there. Before we go any further, just acknowledging our founding sponsor for Take a Stand, which is Tony Allard, and just that we're grateful to be on traditional and largely unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. So we're really grateful to be able to operate on those traditional lands. Before we go further, I just want to talk about our contest, which I hope you'll be excited about. This is a joint contest between Take a Stand and Nature Kids BC, and it's a wild salmon art contest. And one option that you have available to you is to simply create an artwork of wild salmon in its home, in its natural habitat. So for example, here on the upper panel, this photo taken by Nick Tycrob was supplied to a young artist, Yola, who then created this beautiful watercolor. And just incidentally, that's going to be a main character in an upcoming children's book on wild salmon. But so just note that you would go further and you would put in the rocks and the water. So you can create this sort of salmon in this relatively calm environment, or you have the option of showcasing salmon as the amazing athletes that they are, especially near the end of their life cycle, when they travel inland and upstream, sometimes thousands of kilometers, to get to their home stream in order to spawn. Now, I know you're going to get a lot of ideas through Fernando's presentation, and when we get to Norm's presentation on the Great Bear Rainforest, where the ecosystems are a little bit more intact and interconnected, you'll really begin to appreciate how many wildlife species critically depend upon wild salmon for their food, so for their very survival. So another option available to you is to create an artwork of a wildlife that critically relies upon salmon for its food, like this beautiful spirit bear here. So there are many options here, many possibilities here. Another is to create an artwork surrounding our iconic, BC's iconic coastal wolves, which also rely upon salmon for their food. And I thought a really cool twist to this art contest could be to incorporate the sounds of the wildlife right into your artwork. And so this artist here, Dalen Lutzinger, has this video. He's one of the artists for kids through the Gordon Smith Gallery in North Vancouver. So you can take a look at this video, and it's how you actually incorporate the sounds of the wildlife right into your art piece. So for example, on the left-hand side, in the beautiful soft colors there, those symbols represent the soft paws of the wolf as it's running through the rainforest. The swirly bits on the right-hand bottom side are to represent the hunting sounds of the wolf. And the festive yellow symbols are to represent sort of the playful social activities of wolves when they get together in packs and they love to play. And then finally, it's showing the howl of the wolf, which tends to be individual for each wolf. So that's one option if you wish. And just don't be afraid to include more than one wildlife in your art piece, like this beautiful painting of Richard Shorty showing the bear, the eagle, and the salmon in the so-called circle of life. So today, it would be great if you could choose your wildlife, whether it's wild salmon or a wildlife that relies upon wild salmon. If you're interested in incorporating sounds into your art piece, maybe you can do a little bit more research about what sounds that wildlife actually makes and how you might creatively put those into your art piece. And just note that the sky's the limit. You can use any kind of art media that you want: watercolor paints, colored pastels, colored pencils, and so on, crayons. It's all good. And so by the deadline, on or before December 24th, if you can email your artwork to me at Simon Fraser University, kermode@sfu.ca, and you will be eligible to win prizes. So the judging will occur in the first couple of weeks of January, and some of the winning entries will be featured in the upcoming Nature Kids newsletter. So that's all I wanted to say. Just wanted to give some acknowledgements related to the photographs that I used, and perhaps pass the floor on to Fernando, unless you want questions now.
If you have any questions, Allison will dump the link and her email address into the chat, so you'll have that if you want to send her your images. Yeah, and Fernando, do you want to take it away?
Thanks, Christina. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me, and hope you enjoy. I'm gonna talk a bit about the salmon and how close it's to us. So let me just share my screen here. Here you go. So sorry. So the Urban Salmon is the first documentary project featuring the salmonids in the urban environment. So was the first time that someone kind of dedicate time over and over to photograph the salmon around the urban environment. And just mind that when you say salmonids, or you're not just talking about the salmon, but we're also talking about rainbow trout, cutthroat trout, and the steelhead as well. So this is some of the our friends. And how did I find about the urban salmon and how this whole thing started? So I believe most, if you're from BC, you most are familiar with those signs. And here in Metro Vancouver, we're very lucky, and you can find quite a few of those, or even those yellow salmon painted by the drains in the road. And that shows that there's actually a river, a salmon stream, or there was a salmon stream there at some point. So that's how, when I saw this the first time, I just got like, whoa, what does it mean, right? Salmon habitat, how is this possible? So it was very hard to find information about salmon in the urban watershed. By the way, I just posted in the chat a link, a really cool link from Pacific Salmon Foundation. It's called a Salmon Explorer. So you can find all about the salmon in BC. Really interactive website. It's a really good resource. So at the time, it was very hard to find reliable information. So just to give you an idea what I'm talking about. So the first time I saw salmon in the city was here in Byrne Creek in Burnaby. So you can see here just this small dot and this green spot all surrounded by city. And I was like, when I saw on the internet that they were having salmon there, I was like, no way, it's not possible, right? But I went to look for it, and it was just by the SkyTrain station. So I was quite excited to see my first Pacific salmon in the SkyTrain station. So, and that's what I found. I remember jumping in a bus early in the morning. It was August, so it was 7 a.m., still kind of dark. And I saw this beautiful fish just swimming by Byrne Creek, which is like a tiny stream, couple feet wide, and this big chum salmon. And you can see it's just bigger than the river. There's almost no enough water. And it kept trying to go up and up. So I was just hooked. So I'd start looking for more information and checking on the internet and finding out what else could I find fish. And I found it in a lot of streams. So where this passion from salmon comes from. So I grew up fishing. As Alison said, I'm from Brazil. So I was always close to the water and fresh water and fishing. So I started with my following my grandpa, and I was born in this tiny little dot here in Brazil. And in the place is called Piracicaba. And Piracicaba, it's in the Brazilian Tupi First Nation language, means place where the fish holds. So the city is known for this big river, and there's a big waterfall that the small fish just can't cross. So different from salmon here, that you have the species like only when salmon is run, there's only salmon. In Brazil, all the fish species run together at the same time in the summer. So every single fish in the river is swimming upstream to the headwater so they can spawn. but when they reach this waterfall, they can't pass. So the big ones take advantage and just feed like crazy, because this small one is just like trying to jump the rocks and they can't. So the big one, there used to be a lot of big fish in the water there. So I grew up listening to these stories of amazing fish. So look at the size of this fish, right? And I grew up, my grandparents and all his friends talking about this amazing fish, and I want to catch one, right? I want to go and catch it. And they used to say, "Oh, that's for adults. Those are too big. Kids don't go fish those. You gotta, when you get older, you have the chance. You have the chance." So when it was my turn to go fishing, the fish were all gone. There was just no more fish to be fished. So these are some of these fish that disappeared from the watershed. So just to give an idea, this one, the yellow one, the Dorado, here on the top left, that's one of the most prized sport fishing in the world. There's a huge economy, very much like salmon in South America for that fish. And it totally vanished from the watershed. And all this big catfish on the bottom here, those are long-living fish. So when they're gone, there's no way to restore them, right? There's no way like salmon that you can try to have hatcheries. For those, it just doesn't work. So unfortunately, they're all gone. And people were not able to say why and when the fish disappeared. There's just no story. They just said, yeah, they're not here anymore. And they didn't know why. So this is the same river, 2015. And this picture is very important for me because this fish, it has the ability to breathe air. So it goes to the surface and just gulps air straight. So it can tolerate quite a lot of pollution and low oxygen levels. And you see this one is that. So there's just no way for fish to live in the water anymore. And people just don't know why. They just say, yeah, that happened. So I decided that I would try not to let that happen again. So I became a storyteller. So I had the chance to visit some really cool places. That's the Juruena River in the Amazon forest. And that's one of the spots where you can still find uncontacted First Nation groups. So those are First Nations that don't want to get in contact with white people at all. So they find traces and signs that they live in the area. We try to leave them undisturbed, but they don't want any sort of contact. So it's a pristine area. That's us in a rafting boat. We're there for 24 days. And that's, we did a flight over the same area, and you can see the color of the water and how flat is the environment. So like no mountains at all, it's just straight flat, really beautiful. But we are also there to document this kind of issues. So here it's a dam that's being constructed for energy. So you can see how that affects the landscape and the color of the water when it gets in and how it lives. So that just destroys the environment and totally totally transforms the river. And we have very much the same issue here in BC. But also some nice areas like the savannas in Brazil. So very much the same ecosystem you see in Africa, but just no elephants, no lions. But this beautiful place, this kind of Table Mountains and some really cool fish. But heading back here to Canada, it's a nice picture. This is from this year. That's the sockeye, the Fraser River sockeye. So most of the populations of sockeye are endangered or threatened, but this one is a very small population, around 12,000 fish. And they're still doing good, and their numbers are actually increasing surprisingly, and that's less than 100 kilometers from downtown Vancouver. So it's really neat to still have this kind of fish runs so close to us. These are Chinook that feed the endangered orca whales here. That's in Fraser Valley as well. The pink runs, that's Camber River. This year they had 14 million fish running in this river, so just a beautiful thing to watch. That's the white sturgeon. Not sure if you guys ever seen one. Those are just giant fish. They grow almost 5 meters or 15 feet. They're very hard to find. Sockeye in Adams River. But back to North Vancouver, just like beautiful salmon run. Those are coho in the Capilano River. And after 4 years, we visit 29 creeks in Northwest Vancouver, Vancouver, Burnaby, Langley, Coquitlam, Surrey, and gotta also add Port Coquitlam as well. And I'm keeping exploring and finding new fish and new salmon streams, and all year round, so even in winter. These are pink salmon eggs. Usually the eggs are not organized like that. Usually when the female lays the egg, it tries to cover its sediment. I don't know why this one was here, but if you see, there's, you can even see like kind of small detail in the eye. That's the embryo. So those are viable eggs, and hope they made it. And just being in the water so often, we start finding that in some rivers, fishing, ghost fishing tackle was a big issue for not just for fish, but for us to reuse the rivers as well. So we organized some cleanups. This is the kind of the thing we're removing from the river. And I found out that a river can be restored doing that kind of work. So this is the Brunette River. This river by 1955 was a dump. There was no life whatsoever, no fish at all in the river. And it was restored. And nowadays it holds 5 species of salmonids, even steelhead, which is a very rare fish to find in an urban environment anywhere in BC. And we also documented some other rare species like the Nooksack dace, which is this guy here. And an interesting thing about the Nooksack dace is part of the Chehalis fauna. So it's a fish that's been here before the glaciation. So when the ice melted, they got trapped in some spots around BC. So nowadays you only find 4 populations in the whole world. And one of those populations are here in Burnaby, right downtown Burnaby. And they estimate there's around only 10,000 of this fish in the whole world. And it's just there. It's hard to find. It's a tiny, small guy, very, but it's cool to have it so close to us. And why this whole work is so important. So over 50 species of animals rely directly on salmon sustenance. So orcas, Homo sapiens, which means us, sea lions, beaver, wolves, otters, eagles, and so many others. And when you say us, for some people, salmon is just a food source, but for some people, it's their whole life, the whole meaning of their life, their whole religion, and their whole life works based on salmon. So they rely direct on salmon. So it's a very important issue. And photography also creates emotional connection. So when you're talking about getting awareness to a cause, for an environmental cause, for example, photography is an amazing tool. And it can document some unique details that are hard to see with your own eyes. So, and I like to say, like, capture the heart and the mind will follow. So with the phones we have, the quality of the cameras, it's so much easier to get amazing pictures and get people engaged and in watching some cause you want to support. So last year we published a book of the project, the Urban Salmon book. And now we're producing a documentary that hopefully is going to be ready by next year. And I'm going to play the trailer here?
I think you could ask any Canadian about salmon and they will tell you something about salmon. We are well versed in our salmon, but where exactly they live and that they live in our backyards, I think that's still a little bit of a hidden secret. When we talk to people who have been here for a long, long time, and you talk to him and they talk about, walking on the backs of salmon across the streams, it's about wilds and life and water that still is alive and well and able to support the salmon.
So this life cycle that connects freshwaters to the ocean and back again is what defines salmon. They can thrive in desert streams or high mountain lakes or coastal rivers. So they have this amazing diversity, this amazing ability to do well in different habitats. Where they're born in freshwaters, migrate out to the ocean, spend a couple years out there, and then somehow make their way back home.
We can support salmon. We can support hundreds of other species.
So yeah, and thanks so much for watching. And I have one more slide. That's a production from this year. So I was working a lot in the Squamish Valley, which is very close to us as well. And not a lot of people were aware of that beautiful area. So I'll just like to share another short video before finishing. And yeah, thanks so much. And there's the website of the project and an Instagram. So if you're looking for someone around us, just check Instagram. I'm always posting pictures and information. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Fernando. Your photos and video are incredible. I felt like I was like swimming in the salmon stream with the so cool. Before we take questions, I just wanted to ask a little bit about that stewardship part. So you were saying about being able to restore creeks and streams. Can you talk a little bit about what that might look like and how we can get involved with doing some of that work?
Yeah, so we're very lucky around Vancouver. We have a couple active stream keeper groups. So they're always looking for volunteers. So you can do from removing invasive plants all the way to helping them promoting the work or documenting the river. There's so many opportunities to go and help. And also there's a group, it's called Pacific Stream Keepers Federation, and they offer stream keeping training. So it's like they have different small courses, and they're I mean, like $20. It's not super expensive, and you can go and do 4 hours or 8 hours and learn how to do stream keeper work. So from taking water samples to identify fish, collecting fish, and all this kind of work that the stream keepers do. Let me share some links here.
Does anybody have any questions that you can, for Fernando, you can put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask, please go ahead.
So yeah, this guy's here. And I believe most of the groups here in BC, they have or like a Facebook group or a website. So if you Google, they should just type the name of the creek that's close to you, and you probably will find some group or someone that's doing some activity there.
So we have a question here that is wondering how you got that video. Do you have to go swimming in the creek with the salmon? How did you capture that?
Yeah, so sometimes I do. Depends on the size and the time of the year. So once the salmon starts spawning, like lay their eggs, I try not to get in the water or to be the least invasive way. So I use a lot of GoPros, poles. Sometimes I use like tripods. So I set my camera and I kind of control it remotely. Or if for like bigger rivers, I just get in the water. That's my favorite way. But you know, you have to keep the balance. It's important to document that, but it's more important not to disturb the fish. So I have to kind of find ways, but I try to be in the water as often as I can. It's really nice to see in the camera, and you see so close, like the small details and the eyes, and the way you look at you is pretty neat.
Okay, we have a bunch more questions coming into the chat here. So you have this beautiful photo behind you. What salmons are those?
Oh, those are coho. Those they should be around a couple months old, and they usually stay around 2 years in fresh water before migrating to the ocean, when they will grow and feed. And in another 2 or 3 years, they usually return to fresh water to spawn and die. So yeah, those are coho.
We have a lot of questions coming in about the sort of what are the biggest salmon and what do salmon eat? Norm, are you going to talk about that a little bit in your presentation, or should we take some questions about that now?
Yeah, you can take a couple questions on that, just in terms of maybe what they eat and potentially the difference in species. Fernando's been already chatting about.
All right. So yeah, Fernando. So yeah, just what's the biggest kind of salmon, and what do salmon eat?
So the biggest one is the Chinook or king salmon, or the Tai. So they can grow over 70 pounds or even bigger sometimes. Nowadays it's hard to find those big guys, but they regularly reach 10 kilos or 20 pounds. They're by far the biggest one, and they have the longest life cycle, so around 5 or 7 years. And the salmon, people are asking what they eat. Just the point, once they get in fresh water, they don't eat anymore. So all the salmon, like when they're young in fresh water, they feed in small insects. Once they migrate to the ocean, they will feed in small fish, squid, prawns, or whatever small animal they can eat. But once they get in fresh water to spawn, they don't eat anymore. So all their energy is spent on spawning and producing the eggs. So yeah, they don't eat in fresh water when they're adults.
And how many different kinds of salmon are there in the world?
In the world, so in the world we have Pacific salmon and Atlantic salmon. So in the Atlantic Ocean is only the Atlantic salmon. Here in the Pacific, we get the coho salmon, the chum, the pink salmon, the Chinook, and the sockeye. In Japan, they also get a different one. It's called the cherry salmon, which it looks like a small sockeye, but it doesn't get that red. And we also have the kokanee, which is the landlocked sockeye. So it has its own spawning, its own life cycle in a lake, and they don't get in the rivers, in the ocean.
And how many eggs does a typical female lay?
Ooh. I need to do some research to get that number, but I'll tell you there has to be a lot, because only 1% of the eggs that hatch will like only 1% of those will generate an adult. Only 1% of those adults will return. So imagine how many eggs have to be produced for 1% hatch, and then another percent of that 1%. So, you know, it's very few, but we got salmon, so it got to be a lot of eggs.
Amazing. Yeah, and just where's some good places to go and see salmon?
Right. So we just finishing the salmon season. So if you go check the creeks right now, you probably will find mostly dead fish, which is part of the cycle, because they're just wrapping up their spawning time. Depends when you are, you may find some fresh coho still moving up. So around Metro Van, I recommend Maplewood Farm in North Vancouver to see chum and coho. It's a really good spot, a beach, a big sand beach. You can get close to the river. Capilano River, of course, is a beautiful place. You don't need to get to the hatchery. You can just walk. There's a couple bridges, and if you look down the pools, especially when the sun is out, you probably will find fish all the way to January. So beautiful place. In Burnaby, there's a Stony Creek and Brunan River. So there's the Brunan River Greenway, if you Google that, and you can access that. There's lots of buses or 5 minutes from the SkyTrain. And it's just not salmon there. This time of the year, you can even find cougar, bears, bobcats. So the whole salmon thing going on. Yeah, it's very close to Burnaby Mountain, so it's a unique place. Also Langley, there's the Tyne Head Hatchery in Tyne Head Regional Park. Beautiful place. I believe now the hatchery is closed, but you can walk the park, and they have a couple viewing platforms, so nice spot. And yeah, I think around Vancouver, those are the places. And if there's anyone that's from Fraser Valley, I can give some places around the valley as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fernando. So we're going to go over to Norm now, and we're going to go for a journey into the Great Bear Rainforest. So Norm, I'll turn it over to you.
Right on. Hello, everyone. Great to be on here this morning. Fernando, amazing presentation. I just love all those underwater shots. Are really, really cool.
Thanks.
Share our screen here. So yeah, I'm excited to chat with everybody here just about the Great Bear Rainforest, a place that's really, really close to my heart. We're going to talk about salmon and spirit bears and culture, and really the connection that salmon provide on our coastline. And so you can have a look at the map of our coastline here. You can see where Vancouver is on it. And the area that I work in is up near Prince Rupert, so south of Prince Rupert and south of Kitimat. So that's the north coast of British Columbia. You can see Haida Gwaii off to the west there. Bella Coola would be your central coast. So I work south of Kitimat in Gitga'at territory. First flew up there about 20 years ago and started guiding up there. And so I had moved from Ontario. I was a high school teacher out there and moved out west, and I wanted to get into the outdoor world. And so I got my guiding certifications, found myself working up in the Great Bear Rainforest. And so one of the things I love to do is paddleboard. So about 10 years ago, I started paddleboarding, and I thought that, the paddleboard was a really amazing tool to be able to explore our coastline with. And it was quiet, and you can get into places that boats couldn't get into. And it was really, really great to get around. And it was, an amazing way to explore. One of the other things that I love to do on our coastline in the Great Bear Rainforest, especially when the salmon get into the river, are go into the rivers and just watch and spend a lot of time on the rivers, because it's absolutely amazing once the salmon come into the rivers, all of the wildlife that end up coming down to those rivers. So really enjoy working up in the Great Bear. Actually, this was the first year in 20 years that I haven't been up to Gitga'at territory just due to COVID. So that was the challenge, not being up there, but we want to keep those communities safe. And I'm really looking forward to getting back up there, hopefully in 2021. But when I first got up to the Great Bear Rainforest and started working up there. As I said, I was working in Gitga'at territory, and this is the cultural center in Hartley Bay. And so I was, especially coming from Ontario and coming out west, I was really learning a lot, not only about the ecosystem, but I was learning about the First Nations on our coastline from north to south. And there was many lessons that I took away from the First Nations. And something that I realized really quickly was that everything is connected, right? The oceans, the rivers, the rainforest, all of the species that are on our coast, and we are included in that. And so the First Nations people have been here harvesting and living with the land upwards of, in some areas, maybe close to 15,000 years, maybe more. And so that's something that I really learned. And I also realized just how much respect as well they had for the wildlife around them, all the different types of species, right? And they had taught me that we're part of this food chain, we're part of this ecosystem, and that what you do to one aspect of that ecosystem has an effect on every other aspect. And so that was a real important lesson for me. Another lesson was just, as I had mentioned, about the respect for the lands and the waters. You know, the First Nations have lived off the land and lived off the rivers and oceans for a long, long time. And so they have a lot of respect for that, you know, for the food sources that they get. You know, something else that a friend of mine had said to me is, take what you need and use what you take. So don't ever take more than that. And a lot of times they'll go out, the First Nations will go out and harvest, and they will, yeah, just take what they need. And once they've got everything for the community and for the year, then that's it. They leave the rest to be and to grow. Also realize the importance of the elders in the First Nations communities, and how the elders will teach the youth on the traditional information and places where to fish and places to harvest clams and cockles. And so that was really amazing. One of my favorite things to do is just to sit down with an elder in a First Nations community and listen to their stories, because there's always so much to learn. And this is my friend Gerald Amos up in Kitimat, and he supported me on one of our paddleboarding Stand Up for Great Bear journeys up there. But even on the south coast here, you can see the importance of salmon to the people, to our First Nations people. And this is right here where I live, here in Squamish. This is the village of Stopmas, and this is a Squamish welcoming figure. And what do you think it's welcoming back? This figure is here welcoming back the salmon. So we're December now. A lot of the salmon have already come in. A lot of the eagles are here in Squamish right now because it's their wintering grounds. But throughout the south coast and in many First Nations territories, you would see these welcoming figures welcoming back the salmon, and they would have celebrations for the salmon returning. That's how important this food species was. Friends of mine like Cam and Eva up in Hartley Bay, when the salmon are working their way down the coast in the springtime, Fernando's already talked about Chinook salmon as being the largest salmon. So they'll go out in their boats and fish for Chinook salmon. And then as you get into July, they really focus on sockeye salmon. And so this is sockeye salmon that they're hanging up in their smokehouse. And this is one of the ways that they can preserve the salmon for a long time, is by hanging it up and by smoking it. And then as it gets into the fall and the salmon come into the rivers, they're able to harvest the pink salmon and the coho and the chum salmon when they enter the river. So I've always been told that the salmon are a gift from the Creator. This was something that was probably one of the most important food species that can be given to our coastline. And we also know this species as a keystone species, a species that's so important to the ecosystem that if you're to remove the species from the ecosystem, then that ecosystem would start to collapse. So not only is it a keystone species for other species, upwards maybe of 200 different species depend on the salmon, but it's also critical to us as humans, to our First Nations people up and down the coast. And so it really has been a gift. And that keystone species is critical for us on our coastline. What do you think are some of the species that depend on wild salmon? course, we depend on wild salmon. Our First Nations brothers and sisters do as well. But what type of wildlife species do you think depend on wild salmon? And I think Fernando had a slide in there and had a cue to a few of these salmon connections. So if we head into the ocean, some of the key species that we'll see on the ocean are harbor seals, right? One of the things I love about this is you see how easily the harbor seal blends into the rocks, how they can use camouflage. So they're actually pretty hard to see sometimes on that shoreline, but the harbor seals are dependent on salmon, this little family of river otters. So I was not last summer because I didn't get up there, but the summer before I was up in one of the salmon streams, and I was pretty high up in a salmon stream where we're with some guests waiting for the bears to come out. And way up the river, a family of river otters came up, and they're in this little pool. And what were they doing? They were fishing for salmon. So they would come in from the ocean and the lower parts of the river. And it was actually the first time I saw a family of river otters actually up a river feeding on salmon and then taking it into the forest. We also have these big, loud, boisterous creatures. I'm not sure if anybody has seen these down here on the South Coast. We're really getting a lot of these coming back to Howe Sound and back into the Squamish River area. And these are Steller sea lions. So these are the largest sea lions that you'll find on our coastline. And so they are really dependent on the salmon as well. And they also like herring. So herring on our coast is a keystone species, and we've had a lot of herring coming back into Howe Sound in the last couple of years. And so we're getting these Steller sea lions working their way back as well. One of my favorite species. So again, I get out and paddleboard, and sometimes I'm lucky enough to run into some pretty cool wildlife on my paddleboard. But Fernando touched on it as well about the importance of salmon to our killer whales, to the orcas. And we've got generally two types on our coastline: residents, which feed on salmon, and we've got transient killer whales, which will feed on the harbor seals that you just saw and the Steller sea lions. And so down here on the South Coast, our South Coast residents are a little challenged at this point, because one of the challenges they face is there's not enough Chinook salmon. And Chinook salmon, as Fernando said, are the largest salmon. And so they really depend on Chinook salmon. So again, if you take Chinook salmon away from the ecosystem, it's going to have a huge impact and a big impact on our killer whales, our resident killer whales. Lots of bird species as well. So can anybody identify what type of bird this is? Let's see if I'm going to check the chat here and see if I can. Not sure if I can pull that up here. I guess I have to. Where's my
We have a
cursor?
couple of guesses, Norm. We got an osprey or a falcon.
Right on. Yeah, osprey. So this was, and if you look closely, you can see that it's got a half-eaten small salmon in its claws there. So we've found this guy feeding up high, and yeah, the osprey fishhawks, they love the salmon. And of course, we've got our bald eagles. And so wherever you find the eagles, generally that's where the salmon are. And here in Squamish right now, all of those eagles have come back to their wintering grounds. But when I'm up in the Great Bear Rainforest, if it's the springtime, usually we see the eagles out on the shorelines, up in the trees, and they're on the points looking for salmon. But as those salmon start to go into the river, all of the eagles as well head back into the river. And they really follow the salmon around. And just getting back to this one, I also brought my eagle feather. I've got lots of eagle feathers. One of my favorite things to do in the fall as well is to go into the rivers and look for eagle feathers, because the eagles are in there feeding on the salmon. And a lot of times they'll drop these beautiful feathers. So I like to find those feathers. I'm not sure if anybody here has found an eagle feather or any other feathers maybe along the salmon streams. Beautiful great blue heron. So the herons will take a lot of the smaller salmon, some of the fry in the rivers, and then some of the smolts that you'll see in the ocean, but they'll also take some of the smaller salmon. They're pretty voracious predators and really adept at catching fish, very quiet and stealthy. So I believe we've got a friend of ours, Chris Darmont, on with us today as well. So a lot of what I've learned about coastal wolves initially came from Chris and Rain Coast and some of the presentations that I saw him do. But once we move from the ocean and we start getting into the rivers and to land-based predators of salmon, we can talk about our coastal wolves. So most of the diet of coastal wolves throughout most of the year is on deer, but once it gets into the fall, these coastal wolves love to feed on salmon. And it wasn't that long ago that we just started finding out that these coastal wolves would come down to the river's edge to feed. And so when I first went up there 20 years ago, I found this so fascinating. I found it, walking into a salmon stream in the fall and seeing all these salmon carcasses around. There was clues, there was just clues. You might not see the wolf, you might not see the bears or the eagle, but there was always clues in these salmon rivers. And I absolutely love that. And one of the clues that I would see was we'd see these kills that were made on salmon. And what I learned was that the coastal wolves only eat the heads of the salmon. And so I guess there's a lot of fat and a lot of the more nutritious parts for the wolves are contained in the heads. So you can see these 3 salmon here have their heads taken off. The other thing you can see here is you can see where those teeth mark are. Unlike bears, wolves, they'll trap the salmon with their paws, but then they have to get down with their jaws and actually grab the salmon out of the river. So I was always amazed when I would see these carcasses, because I was like, wow, a pack of wolves was here feeding like last night probably. And you would walk around. And so if you can identify this species of salmon, these are pink salmon. So these are the salmon that are 2 years old. They've come back to the rivers. And in a lot of the rivers that I work in up in the Great Bear Rainforest, are smaller rivers. And those smaller rivers have these pink salmon usually coming back to it. So really, really important species. We'll also see chum salmon. So this is a large chum salmon. And again, just the head has been taken off this particular salmon. And the chum salmon are one of the first species of salmon to come into the rivers early. So when the salmon haven't been into the rivers yet and the wildlife are getting really excited to start feeding on salmon, these big chum salmon get hauled out pretty quickly because they're the first ones to come up, and the wildlife get pretty excited about these large ones. And a lot of times these bigger salmon get pulled further into the forest. And in some areas you'll come along and you'll see, I've seen upwards of 20, 25 salmon pulled out of the river, these little rivers, with their heads all taken off. So again, you would know that there was a wolf pack most likely sitting here at night pulling out these salmon. And so you can actually see most of those are all pink salmon, except for the one on the far left. If you can see the one beside the tree, you can see that that's a larger one that has its head taken off, and that's the big chum salmon. But what happens to all of this salmon that doesn't get eaten by the bears and the wolves and the eagles and all of the different species that depend on it? All of that salmon ends up going back into the forest. And so we refer to our temperate rainforests, and especially in areas like the Great Bear Rainforest, we refer to them as salmon forests, because the salmon are fertilizer that help these trees grow. And within that salmon, they've got nitrogen, which is really important for the growth of the trees. And so you can actually take a core sample of a tree and see which years had the best salmon runs according to the growth rings on the trees. And you can find remnants of salmon at the very tippy top of these trees in a needle 300 feet at the top. So again, we see that salmon is not only important for us, for the wildlife, but it's really critical for our temperate rainforest. And these trees along salmon streams grow 3 times larger, 3 times faster than trees that are away from those salmon streams. So critical. We see salmon throughout the temperate rainforest and the Great Bear Rainforest. Sometimes I'll find salmon kills that just have the brain eaten. And this salmon has been eaten by bears. So again, when I first came up to the Great Bear Rainforest, I was learning so much. one of my favorite books when I first got up there was this book here, The Great Bear Rainforest, Ian McAllister. So I learned a lot from that. And still to this day, one of the things I enjoy most is going into the rivers to watch bears fish for salmon. And again, you can see the spots on this tail. This is a small pink salmon that this bear has gotten. And so in the area that I work in, there's black bears, there's grizzly bears. And so these bears are really fortunate to have salmon coming into the rivers, because the bears need to feed on the salmon and they fatten up. And they've calculated in places like Haida Gwaii, in the thick of the salmon season, that an adult bear will take or they'll consume 20,000 calories of fish per day. And that's about 40 Big Macs. So that's a lot of calories and a lot of food that they take in. And if the mother bear goes into the den healthy, because of all the salmon that it's eaten, it's going to have more offspring. There's going to be much more success for that mother bear to have more cubs, bigger cubs, and for those cubs to mature quicker. So again, not only important to the moms, but important to the whole family. And then one of my favorite species in the Great Bear Rainforest is the spirit bear. And this bear in particular was still probably my favorite bear, because this was the very first spirit bear that I ever saw 20 years ago. The Gitga'at people and my friend Marvin Robinson, who I work with up there, Moxkamol is the Gitga'at name for spirit bear. And I actually saw this spirit bear because I was with some clients up there, and we were just sitting along the salmon stream, which we like to do, and watching the salmon spawn. And this bear came out for about 5 seconds, grabbed the salmon, and ran back into the forest. And that was the first time I ever saw a spirit bear, and it never came back out again. And I just felt really grateful to have had that experience. Now, these spirit bears are really incredible creatures. They're not albinos, they're not polar bears. They have a recessive gene that the mom can carry, and the mom can be black, as you see here, but it can have 2 white offspring, or 1 black cub, 1 white cub. And it's a hereditary gene that gets passed along. But why do you think we would have a white bear in the green rainforest? What advantage would we have by having a white coat? Well, what they've figured out is that these bears can hunt better during daylight hours. And so when the salmon are running up the creeks and they look up, that white coat blends in with the sky. And so it makes these spirit bears better hunters during the daylight hours. So that's quite an advantage. So if you have an advantage with that white coat over your black brother or sister, then that hereditary gene will get passed on, making them really great hunters. But they do blend in really well. So you guys have to have a look here and see if you can if you can find that spirit bear in there somewhere. And so once you found it, this is in the fall. And one of the other things that I've always find amazing too is I spend a lot of time along the salmon streams watching the bears, but if you take some time and actually go walking into the forest, or if you walk up onto some of the hills that are near these salmon streams, you'll see that bears have hauled salmon way out of the river and up to some of these hills. And so they're moving a lot of that fertilizer into that rainforest, but they're really amazing hunters, and they'll carry that salmon pretty far away. And I love this one because you can just see how great of climbers they are in there. So scientifically, we've found that, hey, maybe this white coat helps catch salmon. And if you think about it, salmon are so critical to that ecosystem that the salmon actually changed the coat of a black bear to white. So that's pretty amazing when you think about that type of connection and what salmon have been able to do. But according to my friends in Hartley Bay, it was the raven that created the white bear. And the raven, who was known as the trickster and the creator of the world, according to the First Nations people, the raven issued a decree. It's called the Raven's Decree. And the raven said, I'm going to put every 1 in 10 bears here in the Great Bear Rainforest and in Gitga'at territory, I'm going to make every 1 in 10 bears white to remind me of a time when the world was covered in ice and snow. And so it was Raven and the legend of the Raven and the Raven's decree that created the white bears. So a couple of different ways to look at, but absolutely spectacular bears. They are really amazing to see in the wild, and they're really special. And so when you look at these white bears, the white bear is a really good example, or spirit bear, of a species that talks about how connected we are to salmon, right? And it's the salmon that created the white bear, and the salmon connect the oceans, and they connect the rivers, and they connect that temperate rainforest. So always, whenever I see a spirit bear, it's always a really incredible opportunity, and I hope everybody gets a chance at some point to see that. A lot of threats to our salmon, and Fernando's done an amazing job of just super inspiring to see these salmon coming back to our urban areas, right? We can find these areas down here on the south coast, and there's a lot of threat to this species. So if we've got this species that's so important to us as humans, right, important to our rainforest, important to all of our species, and we've got threats, right, then what are the things that we can do to protect wild salmon? And I think for a lot of it, it comes down to finding those things that you're really passionate about. We're excited, maybe for some artwork to come in to help these wild salmon. And there's a lot of things that you can do. And there was a threat to the Great Bear Rainforest as well. And so in working up there for the last 20 years, about 10 years ago, we had the real threat of oil tankers on our coastline. And so that was something that really bothered me, because I had spent so much time up there and viewing the wildlife and spending time with my friends in Hartley Bay, that this was a real threat to the coastline. And so I wanted to do something about that. And even one individual, right? All of us have the power to make a change and make positive change. And so I wanted to paddle the tanker route. And so we did a film called Stand. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but I'm sure we could put a link into the trailer for Stand, and you can watch it on Vimeo at some point. But there's a lot of different ways that you can stand up for wild salmon, that you can stand up for our coastline. And I think really when you stand up for wild salmon, you're standing up for yourselves, right? We're standing up for our coastline because so much is dependent on that wild salmon. And just to finish off here, so I didn't get a chance to get up to the Great Bear Rainforest this year, so I took some video from some of our bear viewing and wildlife viewing trips, and I'm just going to share that with you right now to wrap up our presentation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Norm. Again,
You're
just
welcome.
amazing
So,
images
yeah,
and
most
videos.
of that was done in salmon time, when the salmon come into the rivers up there. So pretty fortunate to be able to share that. So thank you.
So we're at time, so I understand if anybody has to jump off and leave, please do. It was lovely to hang out with you today. And the rest of you, if you want to stick around for a few minutes, we'll take some more questions if you have anything that you want to ask Norm.
Yeah, I see there's I'm just looking through the comments here, just with Tanae, with a lot of eagles in Surrey. I've seen a lot of eagle feathers. This is great. Yes, your dad, for sure. Your dad, Chris, taught me a lot. Amazing presentations. I remember a long time ago. Yeah, we've seen a lot of wolves swimming up there as well in the Great Bear, and the wolves are like marine mammals, so they'll swim after deer, and they'll swim from location to location or island to island looking for deer to eat, and they're very, very good swimmers. So what eats the rest of the salmon? So that's the great thing. So the bears and the wolves will have their feed, and then you'll see eagles. Eagles will really clean up a lot of the salmon in the rivers. Ravens are in there as well. I've seen martins as well. Pine martins will be in there. I've seen wolverines in the rivers, so they'll feed on it. So you can have a salmon run, let's say, of 50,000 salmon in this one little river, and then if you go in there a month later, there's hardly anything left. It's all gone. It's been eaten, or it's gone back into the forest. So it's absolutely amazing. And these rivers are really loud because of all the wildlife that's in it. Glad you guys found that spirit bear. Sometimes it's not easy to see that one. We didn't have a tanker spill. This is what we were trying to avoid, was a tanker spill, but Alaska did, right? Years ago, before you guys were born probably, the Exxon Valdez spilled up there. So that was really, really detrimental to our coastline and to that coastline up there. So that was something that we were trying to prevent in our Great Bear Rainforest as well. You can imagine if, we had an oil spill, right? Not just in the ocean, but we've got really big tides on our coastline. And so those tides go up the rivers a long, long way. And so a spill would have a huge catastrophic effect on our ecosystems. How salmon make bears change color? So this happened over thousands and thousands of years through adaptations for the most part. And so probably at some point one bear was born and it might have been a little bit of a lighter color, and that lighter color allowed it to hunt better during the day. Well, that was a gene that was important for that bear's survival. And generally what happens, this is probably another whole science class, but that gene will get passed on. And then because those bears are only found in the Great Bear Rainforest, they're only found in that area of the world. So that adaptation has allowed them to be successful hunting, and there's really not a lot of them around. Why do coyotes have a brown stripe on their back? What you'll find is there's various color phases to the bears. Some are almost an orange color, others are almost pure white, and that one that you saw climbing had an orange stripe going right down its back. So pretty amazing. And even some of the black bears you'll see will have a big white spot on their chest. So you do see a lot of different. Are there any vultures? You know what? I haven't seen any vultures in the Great Bear, but I do see them down here on the south coast. But not to say they're not up there. I just haven't seen them in the rivers feeding. Which place did you see the spirit bear? Well, that's a secret. You're going to have to talk to Marvin Robinson about that one. No, it's in areas on Princess Royal Island and Gribble Island. Those two islands probably have the highest concentrations of white bears up there. So I think that's most of the questions. Comments. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allison and Norm and Fernando. That was an amazing presentation. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us this morning.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And just one final thing about the contest. We do have this youth action kit. If anyone wants to go further than the art contest, or if there's teachers in the audience that may want to book the program, we have a whole kit on how youth can be educators, rescuers, systems thinkers, and grassroots changers for wild salmon. So I can send that out to anyone that requests it. I put my email in the chat box. So.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to seeing all of your beautiful drawings and images. So you can send those to Allison. Her email's there. And as always, you can send them through to Nature Kids as well. You have all of our contact information. So thank you so much. And we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.